This is the Tesoro AI podcast with Darius Gant. AI is changing the world and fast. This episode is coming to you courtesy of Tesoro AI, the #1 recruiting service for software development and AI talent.
All right, here we go. Steven, thank you. I appreciate you taking some time. I know travel schedules were a bit busy for a while there, but we finally get some time to sit down and chat. I appreciate you joining us.
My pleasure.
So I want to kick things off with your background. Serial founder, also have been executives in other capacities. We're going to talk about AI, Gen AI. There's also this legal component, there's this data component, but we'd love for you to give us some more background into kind of your progression through your career up through the point where what we'll primarily be talking about today, Tomta. But if you could just give us the storyline, that'd be perfect.
Sure. Mission driven, want to be helpful, Midwest raised, Nordic ethnicity, all these sort of aligned in. I just wanted to improve things. And so always been entrepreneurial, always been a hard worker. I get that from my parents. And I try to pay attention, so you can see what needs attention in the world. But I started life early, just my fascination with bicycles and automobiles, like any young man, I guess, not to be, I'm sure young women too, but certainly my friends. And so that I had a passion for that particular product creation, but yet being an American, I didn't quite understand how I could work for a company like GM or Ford and enjoy it. And I didn't have much respect for them anyway at the time in the 80s and 90s. So I followed my heart. I've always had a very strong sense of equality and justice and fairness. So I went to law school. And followed the logical trajectory as a young lawyer, right? Was lucky enough to get a fantastic job as a corporate lawyer out of law school to pay off my loans. But within 2 years, I was bored and unhappy because being a corporate lawyer in the financial services area is pretty, and again, I don't want to, if you work in that space and you love it, good for you. But I didn't find it very meaningful to me. And so I was fortunate to have had a law professor who knew I wasn't happy, and she was a DA in Minneapolis. And she had just had a writ of certiorari granted, which means she applied to the Supreme Court to hear a case. And the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. And so I had a lightning strike opportunity to quit my corporate job and go work for the DA, as a staff lawyer and work on the U.S. Supreme Court appeal, Fourth Amendment search and seizure matter. And so, of course, I did that. I'm so glad I did, because I was also a trial and a drug lawyer as part of that, and really just was so satisfied to give back, right? To do something of social import. And then, of course, I left there into a big firm and supported entrepreneurs. That's where I really found my voice. And I've always been sort of retail minded. So I did really well as a young lawyer, meaning you have to be a good lawyer. I would call it a good mechanic.
Okay.
Like whatever, doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer, you have to own and understand and deliver on what you do. Mechanic, right? A plumber, whatever. You have to be good at that, right? Before you can do something else, like manage other plumbers or manage other lawyers, right? So I think my trajectory as corporate and, overworked DA and then overworked associate, who paid attention, you develop those skills and then you become able to really satisfy the need to listen to your clients and understand how to solve their problems. And I think that retail mind that I had, a lot of lawyers have this attitude that I know everything and I'm going to tell you what to do. And I never had that attitude. I'm like, no, they're coming to me with their problems and my job is to help them solve them. They know best what's good for their business, right? So, but I did that for a while and helped, some businesses, grow. Franchise and distribution was a really great training ground because, again, you have to understand business systems and business models and then communicate that business system in a SEC document and then, file the franchise circulars. And it was really an interesting job, I thought, because it was part MBA, part lawyer. But I wanted more. I wanted to be part of the business team. I didn't want to just be an advisor anymore. So I struck out for LA, where all the really cool car related startups were, and beat the bushes for about 3 months in 1999 and got a job at carparts.com.
Okay.
But in business development, because I didn't want to be a lawyer per se, I think we raised millions, but then we raised $42 million after I joined. And they said, wow, we are so busy. Steven, would you be general counsel? We need someone who understands the business. And you're a lawyer. And I'm like,
Right. So that was like when you say business development, was that like on the sales side and then you went back to the legal side?
yeah. So the idea
Okay.
was carparts.com back then was an e-tailer. So the
Mm-hmm.
idea was make, model, year search for your car. So if you have a Porsche 911, let's say an 89, G50,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I need an oil filter for that, or I need a whatever
Got it.
for that, right? And if I go into the car part store, they've got all those, remember those books? You're probably too young,
Mhm.
maybe, but they had all these big, huge books on the counter. They'd have to flip through it. And then, oh, okay, it needs this. Let's see what we have in stock. It was ridiculous. And
Okay.
they'd likely get it wrong. And then if you're a jobber or a mechanic, and you were ordering parts, like 30-40% likely to get that wrong too. So you bring your car in and you want it back right away. And so I need to order parts. So it was a very broken system. So I found it really compelling to solve and improve that customer service
Right.
through technology. That's what I was passionate about. How do
Okay.
you leverage technology to improve things, to reduce waste, right? To improve speed, to help people make better decisions. I've always been passionate about that. And
Mm-hmm.
so car parts, and we did that for 5 years. That was my MBA pretty much. We went
Right.
dot-com boom, right? We clearly
Right.
understood that being an e-tailer wasn't sustainable. We shared a campus with eToys, if you remember those guys. They were all driving Ferraris because I think they went public or they had sold their stock, and then they went bust, literally evaporated, like the company's no longer, right? So, I mean, it was .com. And then, so we survived .com, we survived 9/11, we survived all these things, and we pivoted into an enterprise supply chain software company. And I was a big part of that because it was a massive M&A strategy where
Okay.
we're using our stock to
Right.
buy these technology companies that were components
Mm-hmm.
of the supply chain. So it's almost like a roll-up.
Mm-hmm.
And so we sold that to Mamsoft in 2005, a UK
Okay.
company. And then by that time, word had gotten out about how tenacious I was as a general counsel. And so there's a company called Aristocrat out of Australia and North American based in Vegas. And they liked what I did. And I fought off CCI Triad and Reynolds because they tried to kill us by suing us. They
Okay.
liked that because they had a heavy patent litigation against the number one IGT at the
Mm.
time. And they were losing billions to them. So I went and did that. And then I did that for a couple of years. And that was really cool because, again, it was you moved from EEPROM delivered technology. And if you remember, these casino slot machines were like dumb systems, right? They were software delivered systems, but they weren't networked really. And
Okay.
so, and my vision was, well, why wouldn't we just network them and base them off of a single compute? Like, why wouldn't you do that? You can do that. It's cheaper, faster. You can change games faster, right? Because if you had to change a game in a floor and you have 1,500 games, they had to do it manually, like
Right.
literally remove things. And, versus just go, nope, this bank will be those games, right? And hit an iPad, right? So that was the vision there. And so I really enjoyed being part of that. But then I fell in love and, my girlfriend, we moved to New York City and I joined another startup called Axiom. And Axiom was a like super temp at the time. So they only
Okay.
hired people who had great deal of experience as lawyers, like GCs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that for a couple of years in New York, in Manhattan, but then got the itch to really go after another industry that I thought was seriously flawed, healthcare. So I moved back to LA, I think back in 2009 or 10, and joined a company called RxVantage. A couple of brothers started this really cool company. and did that for a couple of years, did an ed tech company called Debate Hall,
Mhm.
and then joined a company called Stable Health that was backed by Vestar Capital Partners. We sold that to Merck. And then another lightning strike was a company called Neo or NextDB. And through a colleague of mine that I had met, he was a board observer on car parts at Investor AB. He asked me about what did I think about this NextDB, knowing that I was pretty plugged in and knew the space, the EV and mobility space really well. And so I worked with him for a month or two on assessing the opportunity. I said, well, this is an amazing opportunity. You should do this. And then again, he was kind enough to introduce me to his boss, one of the co-founders, and 2016, and I joined them.
Okay.
So help build Neo, right? But really the enterprise product. So there was the consumer brand. Do you know Neo at all?
I don't know Neo. I don't know
Oh,
Neo.
okay. So if you go and look them up, they've got I think seven models now that are sold globally.
Mhm.
And they are primarily in
NIO.
NIO. Yeah. Yeah. And they are primarily sold in China and Europe. So, and they're amazing cars because Jack Chang, one of the founders, was truly the car person behind the build. But his job was to build the platform, the enterprise product that we could sell to other OEMs, and
Mhm.
then also base all the consumer brand cars on. So it's really quite clever. It's what Elon Musk tried to do, but to be fair to Elon Musk, he was so early. He was 10 years, almost 10 years before us, right?
Right.
And the minute that BMW and Mercedes and Toyota got wind that he was going to build a car, they killed his supplier contracts. If you remember the RAV4, remember that was a Tesla powered vehicle. It didn't say Tesla anywhere on it, maybe inside, but it was just a RAV4 electric. And then the Mercedes B class, that was Tesla powered. And again, you wouldn't know this because it was a supplier. They were the OEM, right? The tier one supplier. But to me, there was a real opportunity to offer like Audi and Mercedes and all these guys a really robust platform because these guys didn't understand how to do EV architecture. They
Right.
really didn't. I mean, it's not easy to give. I mean, Elon Musk, say what you will about his personal life and just his political shenanigans, which I'm embarrassed about, but I really respect the guy from a strategic perspective. You cannot fault his strategy. Like he is so dead on his strategy. I mean,
If you're a hiring manager and you appreciate the unique skill sets required to build AI solutions, then I would highly suggest you get your hands on our AI talent salary guide. As you know, one of the greatest challenges in building AI products is acquiring the right team. Over 100 plus pages, we dive deep into our global AI talent acquisition strategies. And with our networks in Latin America, we also provide you with actionable advice on how you can scale up your AI team cost efficiently. Once you explore our AI talent acquisition strategies, you'll never look at hiring the same way again. Links are in the description. And just kind of flipping through some of the pages that you laid out here in terms of just your experience in general. You got the legal experience and then also a lot of operational experience
yep,
within
yep.
these tech companies, seen lightning strike a few times. One of the things I was curious about is you then decided to launch a fund. So the question I had, most folks who move from the operation side, then move back to the VC side are like, you know what? I'm tired of building companies. I want to go sit on the other side, the more cushy side. But would love to hear more about, hey, look, I'm going to start. They found a venture capital firm to invest in startups. And then we'll talk about rolling back into the startup world with what you have now in Tomta.
Yeah. So I've always been an operator. So I think, I mean, other than just a seed investor or a mentor, right? So I've mentored at StartX now for over 10 years, in Skydeck for over 10 years, because I'm pretty passionate about helping entrepreneurs avoid the knuckleheaded stuff,
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes plagues them. I mean, they're geniuses, right? But they don't always understand the stuff that will kill them. And so I try to do a lot of that. I try to do a lot with plug and play and anyone who's willing to let me play, right? And help. But I, yeah, you're right. It's really easy to give people advice. It really
Mm-hmm.
is. But for one, again, going back to my Nordic and Midwest roots, who am I? I mean, seriously, like there are so many people that are more qualified than I am to offer that great advice, really. I mean, I can offer some advice, but, so I can't imagine I would be, that effective only as an investor. And quite frankly, I like operating. I like having my hands in the mix. So Tomta was a company that I had met, I think, right before COVID. And then we kept in touch during COVID, and they were called Predatix at the time. And after Neo, I moved to Minneapolis to be with my folks and, make sure my son could be closer to his grandparents. We remember we had no idea, like, towards the end of 2020, what the world would really look like, from a economic and viability perspective. And we had the resources to move anywhere, like a lot of people did in the Valley. So I did that, and to help my parents with they have a real estate business. So it was time to step in and help them and kind of wind that down. But I did some work with Axiom again, and I got seconded by a company called Reef. And Reef was a SoftBank Vision fund company. So that probably says all you need to know about that company, meaning it's probably a bad choice. But some interesting people there. I met some very interesting people there, and I love what they were trying to do. But one of the things that I was involved with, again, is as you are trying to use or leverage data and AI to provide a product or to provide some insight into how to evaluate how to use parking lots, right? Because we can all agree that, I mean, with Uber, micromobility, Lyft, the individual passenger car, trust me, is dead. It is dead. Americans are just too stupid to realize it, but they'll find out, right? But the rest of the world they're already there. They're
in
like, we
terms
don't
of
want
like,
cars
rather than me having my own car, I drive my own car to the grocery store, park it, get out, walk. You're saying where we're going is someone's going to call an Uber, a Didi, a Lyft, one of those services.
You have kids? Forgive me, I don't remember.
No.
Okay. So, but you're human and you have a neighborhood that you live in. And if you had a choice, would you prefer lots of traffic in your neighborhood or no traffic in your neighborhood?
Oh, definitely no traffic.
Yeah. So, I mean, duh, right? I mean, yet Americans want to like have their houses next to cars that are driving by fast and parking lots, right? And I never understood that. The future, if you go to Europe, right, most European cities, they say, well, we don't want cars in the neighborhoods because they don't add any value. And they sit there mostly anyway. I mean, if you have a car, which you probably do, but it probably sits 96% of the time, right? I mean, it's only used seldom. Even if you put on 12,000 miles a year, it's 4% of the time. It's useful life, right? So it seems like a ridiculous amount of money to spend on a thing that you don't use much. And again, this is from a guy who used to spend money on like Carrera Cabrios and BMW M3, like crazy, stupid money on stupid cars, right? But I used to do it. And I agree, it was stupid. Like, where am I going to drive a Carrera? It's a 185-mile-an-hour car, right? I mean, seriously, what? I could buy a Miata, same thing. It's a convertible. And I don't need to go 185 miles an hour. I just need to go 55 miles an hour, right? So, but again, we're really emotional about vehicles in this country. So my point is that is changing, that mindset, for several reasons. One, in Europe, because they value quality of life more than we do as Americans. But it will happen in America because insurance is getting more expensive. Vehicles are double the price as they used to be. But primarily because Americans keep on buying bigger too. They keep on buying trucks and SUVs. And the average price has doubled in the past 10 years of vehicles. And they're under the burden of debt, right? So none of these things are sustainable. So, my vision is that will change. So look at what's happening in the Nordics and in Europe, and that will happen in the rest of the world at some point.
Eventually. Okay.
So, yeah. And again, I don't even remember what the question was. So I'm so I got on my little soapbox and,
No, we were talking about parking structures, but we will use that as a kind of, I do want to dig into Tomta, right?
Tomta, right. Yeah. So, right, that's where I started and I got completely lost. Yes. So parking. So my point was parking, and that's what I thought was brilliant about Reef, because they're a global company, right? So there are former parking lots in European cities that, of course, are not being used as parking lots because no one's driving cars anymore. So, or there are US cities, Manhattan, bigger cities, that they just obviously don't want cars in the city. And so you have these prime real estate. What can you use them for? Well, you can use them for mobile kitchens. You can use them for logistic hubs. You can use them for EV charge, fast charge. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can use them for. But the challenge again was you've got all this data, and it's sensitive data, meaning regulated, protected data that you can't share because it's sensitive and it may not be yours. So it's restricted by agreement. And that was a real bottleneck for developing AI. And you see it obviously in generative AI. You see it with healthcare data. You see it with, everyone's saying, well, use synthetic data. Well, synthetic data isn't a privacy product. It's not. But the markets go out and they say it is, but then the customers find out it's not. And so therefore they stop using those products. So it's a very interesting time in the AI workflow space, I call it in shovels, because most teams don't really understand how to build AI yet. So we're getting all these great tools to help teams build AI. But the number one ingredient to AI is data.
Is the data, right?
And if the data isn't good, it isn't precise, it isn't representative, you don't need to do anything else, is what Andrew Ng says, right? If you don't have good data, skip the rest. Save yourself the trouble. Because at the end of the day, I'm not quoting him anymore, but to extrapolate what he's saying, is if you use shitty data to create an ML model, then that model may work against you, right?
Right.
I'm a Hunt for Red October fan. I'm a Tom Clancy fan. So it's like the torpedo may come at you instead of where you shoot it. That's exactly the problem with bad data and ML models, is it could be working against your business and you have no idea until it's too late, right? Yeah. Oh my God, So that's why part of being an evangelical about the importance of data and privacy, because they're not mutually exclusive. There's some data, like, if you're building an autonomous car and that data is, let's say, camera vision data, and you're getting that on public streets and you're getting radar and LiDAR. Yeah, that's not regulated data in the privacy space. Right. But if you're in healthcare, financial services, or life sciences, or anything else, energy, this is all heavily regulated data. PII.
So for Tomta, we talked about a few different challenges here. One challenge could be that the company that wants to build this AI solution doesn't have data, or they don't have enough data, or they do have a ton of data but it's bad data, or they have a ton of data, it's good data, but there's privacy issues.
There you go.
Curious where you sit, and what problem are you sitting down to help them solve?
So we are a data enablement company. We're not a data provider. So we're a technology that the customer uses, again, because we're a privacy product. So we, of course, would never go to market as a service, because it'd be like, first we'd have to sell, trust us. Like, we don't even want to have that discussion. We're like, trust the tool that you control, and it provides measurements. It provides measurements in privacy, utility, and accuracy. So it tells the user how accurate and how precise that data is and how private it is. So, and our privacy metric is state of the art. No one else has anything like it. We measure on 3 attributes: epsilon, membership risk, and attribute risk. Most synthetic data purveyors, they say they have a privacy metric, but it's really membership privacy, which is, it's
important. Can you define, what's the difference between, like, privacy? I think is pretty straightforward, but like membership privacy, what does that mean?
Yeah, so there are different ways to measure privacy. And so when you're trying to measure membership risk, it's generally, you're talking about related tables, so related databases. So you're trying to prevent me from identifying you, because I know one database, I know the identity of one, an individual in one database. And by that, I can then merge the other database and then identify you in the other database.
Got it.
right? It's
Got it.
one of the challenges that we have a brilliant advisor, Faisal Moshtaq, who came from Change Healthcare, and now he's in private equity. And he was helping me, kind of chew through the sort of life sciences and healthcare viability for us. And he said, commonly pharma providers will have the script, what
Mhm.
you're prescribed, and then they'll have in healthcare data. And so generally, if you have cancer drugs, right? And I know that what's prescribed, I can then look at that healthcare data, that EMR, and know
Uh-huh.
precisely that, oh, that must be you, because
Right.
based on where you are geographically, and right, who else could it be? So that's
Right.
membership risk. You're a
Yeah.
member of two databases.
So the idea there is that, look, we don't want anyone, is it that we don't want anyone in our organization, right, to be able to identify a particular individual based on these two separate data sets? Or is it that we don't want the end user of our product, because we're building this ML model. Do we not want the end user of our product to be able to identify, make a link, and be able to figure out who an individual is?
All the above. Yeah, exactly, right? Because it's motivated intruder, right? I mean, there are, at Staywell, we dealt with just, at the time, right, in healthcare in the 2010s, most breaches are just a result of just stupidity, like
Right.
stupid mistakes. Seriously, like they're shockingly stupid. I mean, it's not like someone hacked in,
Yeah.
Mission
Yeah.
Impossible. No, it's like some engineer was not thinking and put something in a public folder, right? So
Right.
that's a pretty common data breach. We're talking about our product. We want to achieve privacy well above what's required under GDPR, which is the
Okay.
most stringent data privacy law in the world. And so that's our target. And so we want to make sure that if someone wants to identify internally or externally in that
Right.
organization, right, they can't.
Right.
So we want you to know what the risk is. So, attribute risk is just a more generic but more powerful measure of saying what is the likelihood of someone identifying an individual in a data set,
It could be the same
in a data
data set.
set. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, got it.
And that's the one you really care about, because membership is important, but it's a use case based test, right? Whereas
Mhm.
attributes really, if I were to say, what's the likelihood of, if you and I are flying from LA to New York, what's the likelihood of that plane making it there safely? Versus, oh, what's the likelihood of us having turbulence and getting hit by another airplane?
Mhm.
Okay. You're like,
Mhm.
okay, well, that's a really corner case, right? That's membership. Attributes one you and I care about. I want to make sure 99.9,
Yeah.
I want to get there, man. Like yeah,
Yeah.
the likelihood of something like lightning strike. Yeah. Okay. It's so remote. Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand. But that's how I see it. And so I get why competitors want to use the weaker, less relevant standard, because it
Mhm.
makes them look good and the buyer may not be sophisticated enough to know it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
My job is to deliver safety to our customers. I want them to be successful and I want them to achieve their mission. And their
Yeah.
mission is very important. In some instances, it's life science companies that say we want to identify rare disease and address it with rare disease drugs or
Mhm.
treatments. And it's a very important job. Or pandemics, or vaccines for pandemics. They don't need other problems, right? Like,
Mm.
oh, you have to do this really hard job and with poor quality data,
Right.
right? I mean, by the way, let's tie your hands behind your back and then do it.
Yeah.
And that's to me how a lot of these data products are, is they're not honest about the quality and efficacy of using them. I get everyone has a mortgage and you want to sell it, but my job is to be credible to our
Right.
customers and trusted.
Yeah.
So we've doubled down on those things. So
Yeah. And so in terms of kind of the data, you mentioned epsilon risk, you mentioned membership risk, also attribute risk, right? As you think about the individuals, I don't want to say the individuals, but I'd say probably maybe like the customer base. We talked about the purpose of this is, look, you need to use that data to then build a AI model that is actually functional and that is actually spits out the outcome, the
Yep.
desired outcome. Are you seeing, I guess, from a spectrum of kind of startup all the way through enterprise, who are you seeing that is most concerned about, hey, look, we need to be using the right data, we need to be more focused on privacy? What have you seen?
Life sciences professes to be the most concerned. We were invited by the Swedish government almost 2 years ago now. We went to Sweden, and I have a great admiration for the Nordics. Obviously being Norwegian and my wife being Swedish,
Mhm.
their quality of life is extremely high, right? Because they have systems in place, the best healthcare in the world. They have mobility systems, that value people over vehicles. So we went there, and they want to share their very valuable healthcare data to improve their care. And they
Mhm.
also want to be good citizens of the EU and share it with the other EU citizens, right? But the only criticism I would have is they're really slow in adopting innovative
Mm.
methods. So that's my only, we're still waiting. So we've done a couple of POCs, but they're very resistant to try something new. And generally, until I suppose they have to.
Mhm.
Healthcare, obviously, given the sensitivity of it,
Right.
right? Those folks see they have a problem, and life sciences. I think energy as well. We've seen a little bit in the energy space, but
Mhm.
again, their systems are pretty archaic and slow, and by their admission, right? So,
Right.
but they want to use consumer data, consumer demand data, so they can understand how to balance energy production.
Mhm.
Because as we have an appetite for more power, the only thing to do is build another power plant, and that's it's kind of zero sum, right? So if power, you can only produce so much. So
Mhm.
that's why you have brownouts, right? I mean, if you go beyond what you can produce, and it shuts the system down, or you have to shut off grids, right? And wouldn't it be, and it's very doable, by the way, to use AI to manage and prompt and automatically shut off systems that aren't that necessary, right? The
Right.
waste generally, if you remember the Russian Ukraine invasion,
Mhm.
and the EU was faced with this, we used Russian natural gas, right? I mean, the Germans and everyone did. There's a pipeline that goes to the EU, right, from Russia. And they're like, we got to cut back. And I said 10, 15% is no problem I mean, they figure there's so much waste that getting a 15%, conservation would be super easy.
Mhm.
I would argue double that for the US would be super easy. We
Mhm.
waste so much, but humans aren't going to do it. So if you just automate it, it's doable. So that's, to my point, if you leverage that data to build models to then automate,
Right.
the use of power or incentivize systems to
Mhm.
not use as much, we can achieve an amazing amount of
Right.
conservation.
Yeah. And I do want to talk about kind of how a user would engage with Tomta platform. But one thing I'm curious about is, you know, privacy data. People have been thinking about this for a while now. In scenarios where a company says, hey, we have this idea for an AI that we want to build. Before we do that, we've got this data, but we need to go through all of the checks that they would otherwise have gone through with Tomta. What was the or what has been the solution for folks who would be your customers? And I'm curious, as they engage with Tomta, what takes them to the next level? Why do they say, you know what, versus us try to do this in house, we just need to go. We need to go talk to Steven about this.
Well, I think that's a good question. We're early. We're an early stage company, so
Hmm.
I don't have a definitive answer for you. We're searching for, if I knew that, we would be more successful than we are right now. So we're in search of how would people perceive us as a painkiller instead of a vitamin, right? Whereas
Hmm.
I'm a person who takes vitamins to avoid the doctor. I know how ridiculous that even sounds, but what would create urgency with the customer, right?
Right,
And
right,
it's usually a law. So that's what
right.
it is, right? So GDPR was why and the Data Act, which is effective this year, is why we were talking to Sweden, right?
Hmm.
And our UK and all these customers, right? That's why they were knocking on our door, because
Right.
they were out of ideas. and they had to share data, and they had to do it in a way that, and again, remember, humans are humans. So again, we're a product that has an enormous amount of credibility through proven testing and proven measurements and metrics. That said, humans will deploy us. Humans will decide to use us. And so, what human, I'm trying to find that human that is on the hook, to their boss to deliver, a privacy compliant, or let's say competitive advantage, to their business in enabling data to drive their business forward. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for those people who are truly, they understand, they want the best. They want, maybe it's unfair to say, they want Airbus, not Boeing, right? They don't want to have issues with, passengers want to know they get there safely. I don't want to have to think, will that door blow out when I'm in it? So I'd rather not fly them, right? I don't want to be an airline flying Boeing if my passengers are worried they're not going to get there safely, right?
Right.
And so we want to be that product. We want to be the standard. And so that's what we're in search of. And we did file for an NSF grant a few weeks ago, and we're anxious. We think it's a really good fit. It's precisely what we do, privacy preserving technology, and so we're quite excited about it. We think that would be an enormous win for us, and it would establish a great deal of credibility for us. Because again, people have to take a risk on us. We are a bit like, you're asking me to get you to Mars and back alive. You know what I mean? That's a huge trust product. And so how will you know you chose correctly? Well, not until you get back, right? Will you be worried the whole journey? And that isn't, no, but that seriously, that is indeed the challenge with privacy products is how will you know you've achieved privacy? Because I mean, if you don't have problems, does that mean you've achieved it? Or are you just lucky? Right. So, right. Or you haven't been found out. That's mostly what happens in the US in breaches. Mostly breaches aren't reported. And you only hear about the big knuckleheaded ones, AT&T, Target, United Health, like all these idiots that, I mean, again, meaning not the companies, but the people working for them who just didn't do their jobs. Yeah. And now they have these massive breaches, right? Because they didn't take privacy seriously.
Today in the US, I mean, obviously we've got GDPR on the European side, but today in the US, everyone wants to do something in Gen AI. But to your point, you've got breaches that just go unreported. You've got scenarios where these privacy is an issue. Is the recourse for, let's say, the government, are we at the point where the recourse for the government is strong enough where, look, it's just not a slap on the wrist? Like, I really got to think about that. Or are we getting there now that GDPR and some more regulation around AI is coming into play? Are we getting to a point where me as a founder, me as even an enterprise exec, I'm like, look, on our checklist of things that we need to make sure are okay, privacy, data protection is absolutely one of them.
So I'll tell you what I had the privilege of speaking to a class at Berkeley Haas a couple weeks ago. And my topic was AI and privacy and intellectual property value, how you create value. And I'll tell you the same thing I told them, and that is the rule of law is what creates value. So if you comply with the rule of law, you will create value in your company. And I call it freedom to operate, right? It's your freedom to operate in a market. And so, for example, Meta, bad actor, right? I mean, how much they've spent over $2 billion in GDPR fines. And that probably doesn't include the most recent one. So now they may not care because they have plenty of cash. But if you're a customer, right, it's going to impact their business because I'm not going to trust them anymore, right? Yeah. I'm not going to trust them as a enterprise user of their platform, right? I'm not going to trust them as a individual. I'm not on Facebook, by the way, so I'm full disclosure. But because I'm an adult thinking human, But anyway, and that was seriously intended. But there are all these companies that will take a huge hit into their brand, right? And it wreaks havoc internally. I've seen it at Staywell, right? I mean, you see it blow apart executive ranks,
Mm,
because there's no excuse not to do the work, right? That's your job. And
right.
privacy is a human right. So I think there is a change coming, right? GDPR, like before well, you and I were chatting before we recorded this, I was sharing with you that I liken what we do to climate change and
Hmm. Hmm.
sustainability, right? So
Hmm.
think about what, if you go to the Nordics, go to Oslo or you go to Stockholm and you see, wow, people can walk and bike and they can take trams and it's very civilized and people are, it's the rule of law and there's a social contract. That is the future of what we will have to emulate, even in privacy, right? So from a sustainability perspective, we have to, because it's the only way to survive.
Hmm.
We don't have unlimited resources in the world. We don't, right? And Americans aren't that rich. They aren't. They're in fact the most indebted, population of any country, I think, right? Because they
Hmm.
spend more than they make. What I'm saying is the changes are coming. So I think, part of our job, right, when you work in technology and you're an entrepreneur is you have to be a little bit of a future predictor. I mean, if you're not going to make any money and you're not going to be impactful, right? So
Yeah.
like Elon Musk is, say what you will about him, but the guy is visionary, right? I
Hmm.
mean, to build Tesla, knowing what I know about the car industry and having worked in industries where they will try to kill you and they try to kill him because they see him as a threat, rather than say, oh, good idea, let's emulate that. They didn't do that. They're like, no, let's just kill it because we want to keep producing pickup trucks and SUVs that burn gas
Right.
because we make so much money and the American consumer is so stupid, they'll keep buying them, right? Seriously, I'm being completely frank, right?
Hmm.
But that's them. That's GM, that's Stellantis, and that's Ford, right? Because it benefits their bank accounts,
Right.
right?
Right.
Musk was passionate about changing mobility. And he did. It's not just an electric car. I don't know if you've ever had a Tesla, but it's a completely, as a car guy, it's a different experience. It serves you differently than a car would. Yeah, a Rolls Royce or a Port, they're prettier inside. Yeah, they got nicer wood and nicer materials, but it's still a dumb vehicle. Like it's just
Right.
dumb. It's like it looks nice, but it doesn't, I can't speak to it and it can't answer questions and it can't understanding my voice and it can't play. None of those things work in those
Right.
cars because they're stupid products, right? And so
Hmm.
he's completely reimagined in the proper way. And right, the idea, of course, is that even if you have a Tesla that you bought as a personal passenger vehicle, at some point, maybe you can make that car now a car share product, right? That
Hmm.
maybe 12 families can use, or maybe it can be an autonomous taxi or whatever, right? But that's the future. So
Right.
my job, of course, I'm bullish on, yeah, people will care about data privacy. They will care about quality of data and they will care about being impactful in their business.
I'll tell you what, one of the things that, and I hope doesn't happen, but, AI is booming right now, right? Everyone's interested in Gen AI. You've got all
Yeah.
these cool
Yeah.
products that are coming out based on what we've seen from a lot of the kind of the work around LLMs and whatnot. And so we're at like peak excitement all the way through to some of these being household products. But the fear is that we then end up going through an AI winter because some company does something bad with data. Now it's like mass panic, kind of similar to what with blockchain at a point where a lot of folks were excited for good
Oh,
or for
yeah.
bad. Folks excited about blockchain. You got one bad actor, FTX comes in,
Yep.
and then now there are headlines everywhere, and the whole industry is in a trough now simply because one group decided, hey, we're going to violate everyone's trust. You
Yeah,
would hope.
and I forgot to say that I did a interim COO role, with Neo's permission to help a friend of mine who was the CEO of a blockchain company, and he needed just my level of expertise. And again, remember blockchain, this is back in like 2018, 2019, where it's all relatively new, right? But everything was a
Mhm,
security, right? And
mhm,
so, and I had the credibility and the ability to go in and hire the right people and figure out how to unlock $20 million in Ethereum for them, but what a clusterfuck, right? Like it was,
right,
talk about an industry in peril
right.
because of bad actors, right? But I would say in blockchain, cryptocurrency, 99% of them are dubious, right? 1% maybe good, right?
There are
But
all the
but
ICOs and
going back to your point about Gen AI, if you remember, a few months ago, what did you start reading about in Gen AI? Oh, it leaks data. And because it leaks data, people whose data it used without permission, they knew. So I mean,
Right.
it's
Oh
like, and
yeah,
that's
like
my
the
point
the
with,
big
right.
the photos that they would produce would have the artist's name on it. Yeah, that's this.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is when we, and I have a brilliant co-founders, like brilliant, like real, I mean, I'm so blessed with how smart, especially Shori Ball and his son is. They're the right guys. They understand this, but they're like, of course, but I have to tell them people don't know what you know,
Mhm.
obviously, because we even have these big companies using data and they don't understand their models leak data. So therefore they're they have a privacy problem, right?
Right.
And so that's the other issue. If you want to train models, why would you use the real data? Because, right? I mean, if you can get an equivalent that's as precise with a privacy layer around it, so you're not giving up anything, you're only putting a step in, one step there. Why wouldn't you do that? That's where we
Yeah.
are. We're vexed
And
at
if
why
you could
that is.
actually, because we didn't dive into that, but would love for you to explain that a little bit more. Like, what do you mean when you say an equivalent? I've got my data, but like, what do you mean when you say an equivalent? And why is that important when I'm going to actually
Yeah,
run
good
that through my
question.
model?
So let's say I'm a life sciences company and I want to use genetic data from the UK Biobank, right? And I have contracts and requirements and I can't share it cross border. And I mean, they're going to lock me up and say, GDPR, you have to comply and you can only keep it for a certain amount of time. And like very restrictive, right?
Mhm.
Because they're smartly so, they know that you'll screw up and you'll lose it. And then maybe you're UK citizens now, it's that their data is now public. So
Mhm.
that's why they do that, right? But why in the world wouldn't you use a product like ours to say, okay, give us that data. We will generate safe data from that data set, create an exact same data set, but now it's not identifiable at all. But it
Mhm.
has, as a precision, it's as precise as the original data. It just doesn't identify anybody, right?
Right.
So now I can use that data as training data, right? Because again, researchers and ML engineers and data scientists, they don't need to know it's you. They just
Right.
need to know the data that represents you is it's accurate, right? So if
Mhm.
you have a rare disease, that data has to transport over to the new data set, right? Again, synthetic data, guess what it does to that rare instance? It wipes it out. So you
Mm.
can't use it for those use
Right.
cases, right? And they've tried it and it doesn't work. So it
Mhm.
defeats the purpose, right? But our product preserves them. So now you can create a safe sandbox. And what you can also do is you can say, oh, this is for our internal researchers, but we have this third party vendor that they're amazing and they're really good
Mhm.
at this one thing. Now I can invite them to that data set. And other
Mm.
than a competitive intellectual property value I have with the data, because I've created it now as a company, so it has value, but it's
Right.
not a regulatory burden anymore, right? It's
Got it.
now an asset. So I
Right.
can say, well, I'll just make sure they can't use my data to compete with me, right? Because I don't want them to do
Mhm.
that. So,
Mhm.
but now they have access to it. So we get that third party's expertise as well. So I'm serious. Like the more we make hyper accurate data accessible to, there's all smart people in Medellin, right? Everywhere.
Mhm.
I mean, you name
Mhm.
it, they're not just in the valley. They're all over
Right.
the world, but they can't access this data and we can't give it to them,
Yeah.
especially if you're where you are, right? Because of
Right.
privacy laws.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because you get a lot of one of the issues I see commonly being in the AI recruiting space, right? Is look, we want to hire. We can't hire outside of our borders because of the data, right? What
That's
data
right. That's
the
right.
data scientist actually
Yep.
gets to see. So if you can kind of solve that issue, now you create more of a global work culture that
Yep.
basically frees folks up to, okay, now great, I got access to another pool of talent or more clients, or, just, yeah, it seems like it's going to free up a lot of things in a way that folks will have just generally more access and ability.
Or if you're the Swedish government and you truly are, let's say, philanthropic, meaning you really do care about
Mhm.
humanity, you'll say, as long as it's safe, right? It doesn't pose risk to my citizens. Here's a body of rich data that researchers around the world can have access to, right? And I don't have to worry about the likelihood of identifying any individual, right? And so now you have thousands of people, and you might have a couple of Einsteins in there, right? Who are just brilliant, and they solve really hard to solve problems.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that we'll have to, I know we're coming up on time here, but that was kind of the
no
cherry
worries.
on
I'm really
top.
enjoying it.
I do want to, we do have a few minutes left though, but if there's anything you'd like to leave or anything that's coming up for Tomta that you'd like to announce, feel free to let folks know.
Well, I mean, reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to us on our website. If you have an intriguing problem that you want to solve and data privacy is a inhibitor to you, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are pretty generous with the product, especially around public use of data, meaning if you're trying to use data in a way that helps the public good. We're just looking for people to use the product in an impactful way. So, and if you're a life sciences company, of course, and healthcare company or energy company, of course, you need us. And you should reach out to us because, we want to make you superstars. So, but, I suspect people who value precision and safety will hopefully find us and we'll have some good stories to tell you maybe when you and I talk in a few months. So
awesome. Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll end off there, but we'll also make sure we get all of the tags and whatnot for folks to find you as they tune in, and we launched the YouTube version of the podcast. So
oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Darius. I really enjoyed this.